So that brings us to the linebackers, Logan, and ESPN.com's Mike Clay did his positional group rankings for the entire NFL last week. He had Washington's linebacker group as number one, not just in the NFC East, but in the entire league. Oh, what a difference a year makes. Bobby Wagner, seriously. Frankie Louvu, obviously Jamin's still there for depth. Guys like Jordan McGee coming in, young guy. Do you agree with Mike that Washington has got the best, forget the whole league because that's not the podcast we're doing, but at the very least in the NFC East?
I definitely think the division for sure. I think when you look around the league, I think, there's names that pop up like Devin White. And again, I think if you watch, Devin White will make you a great highlight play. It'll make you a great highlight cut up. But I just think the consistency of his play is not always there. I think there's a reason he was one of the most blitzed linebackers in the NFL last year, and it's because you're trying to hide some of his deficiencies as a coverage player. And, when you watch Bobby Wagner, when you watch Frankie Louvu specifically, man, he is a special football player, or he was a special football player in Carolina. And that's why you pay him to come here, right? I think he's one of the better off-ball linebackers in the NFL. I think he gives you flexibility as a pass rusher. I think he gives you flexibility as a blitzer. And he's not the most dynamic coverage player, but he's got good instincts. And I think that's something like that is often underrated when it comes to linebacker play. So I think you get a guy, you pair him with Bobby Wagner, who, is probably a gold jacket guy when it's all said and done. Very instinctive, very smart. And you get this guy who physically can kind of do whatever you want him to do in Frankie Louvu. And I just think that's a really dangerous combination for the rest of the division in terms of linebacker play. And then Jordan McGee is a guy that I'm really excited about watching. Like, you love the coverage ability, you love the physicality, you love the instincts, like all the things. And so to get all three of those guys in the room, couple that with Jamin Davis, who, we're kind of still trying to figure out what exactly he's going to be in this defense. But I think those 3-4 guys make this room pretty special, pretty talented. And again, I know people are really excited about Bobby Wagner, but to me, it's Frankie Louvu is the guy that really sets this group apart.
Yeah, no, Louvu's got a chance to be special for sure. And that's exactly like you said, why you pay him and why you give him a long-term deal versus everyone else that pretty much got one-year deals. It's like, no, we know no matter what, this guy's going to be good. So if he's willing to sign up for 3 years of us, we are definitely willing to sign up for 3 years of him. With Wagner, though, I feel like there's some debate on what he is at this point. Mm-hmm. So what is he at this point? He led the NFL in tackles last year. So we know he can produce, but I remember years when like Zach Brown was here leading the NFL in tackles and you're like, yeah, but he's not actually good. He just runs to the ball, which there are worse things you can do with a linebacker. But when you just are, when you also leave open gaps and you don't cover at all, like the tackles can be not paint a complete picture. So as a coverage player, like, is Bobby Wagner still good? Is he still very good? Is he average? Is he a liability? Like, what is Bobby Wagner 2024 for the Washington Commanders at this point in his career?
I think Bobby Wagner's a good football player, and I think like what I mean by that is like he physically, I think there's been a little bit of a drop off. I mean, when you play as long as he has, like, that's inevitable. But I think the thing that makes him special is his instincts, right? And his understanding of technique and his understanding of offensive run scheme and his understanding of how the offense is trying to attack you, right? Like, watching his film, it's not overly sexy from Seattle last year, but dude is making every tackle. Dude's in the right position all the time. And as a linebacker, like, that's really, really hard to do in today's NFL because basically, like, everything is designed to manipulate the second level of the defense. And when I look at him, like, he just finds a way to be in the right spot. Now, he's not going to be, running sideline to sideline the way he used to. He's not going to blitz the way he used to. He still has it in the bag, but it's not quite as good. But he's still a very, very good football player. And I think when you look at the linebackers around the league and you look at just a certain level of consistency, like, you'd take him almost in every single room over one of the two guys that'll be starting there. And in some cases, both. Like in Philly, I think you probably take him over both. In Dallas, you might take him over both. Obviously, we'll talk about New York here in a second, but I think it's just the floor is so high with him. The ceiling isn't what it once was, but the floor is so high with him. You just can't overstate how valuable that's going to be for this defense. And you pair that with a more explosive guy in Frankie Louvu, and I think you get a really nice pairing in terms of combination.
I think the other thing about Bobby is he elevates everyone around him. So D-line, other linebacker, safeties, corners, like he's going to get you in the right play. He's going to make sure everyone's lined up. He's going to make sure people are alerted to the things that they need to be alerted to that they might not be thinking about themselves. I talked to Defoe about this in camp, and he's like, yeah, I was in the box playing like Buffalo, and Bobby's like, watch for this. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So it's that kind of elevation of your entire defense, even if he himself is not what he once was, that I think makes Bobby Wagner so valuable to Washington, on top of all the stuff that you said of what he does still individually as a player. So Washington is one. The Giants have Bobby Okereke and Mike McFadden as their starters. They also have Isaiah Simmons floating around still, who they acquired from the Cardinals last year as kind of a utility piece. Washington or Dallas, I should say, has Damone Clark, Eric Kendricks, and then the rookie out of Notre Dame, if I'm remembering correctly, Maris Lufau. Philly has Nakobe Dean, Devin White, Oren Burks, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. So where do the rest of this, or where do the rest of these teams fall in terms of how you rank them?
I think for me, in terms of the next two, now I got to look at the depth of the New York Giants a little bit, but I think in terms of the next two, it's got to be the New York Giants. Like Bobby Okereke is a special player, in terms of what they were asking him to do last year. He's long enough to take on offensive linemen. He's big enough to rush the passer. He's instinctive. He can cover. Like, I really like him as a player. Like, he's kind of in the same bucket to me as like Frankie Louvu, probably with more coverage upside and not as good of a blitzer. So like he's got kind of that special wow factor at the position, and I'd say he's for sure top 10, maybe top 7, top 8, something like that. So I think he's a really good football player, and I think what's the other guy's name? McFadden. I think he's just in the right spot all the time, kind of in the same way you get with Bobby Wagner, but without the experience and the consistency. So I think they're both really good players, and I think they're a ton of fun to watch. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably the second group for me.
Yeah, the depth. I think Simmons is such a wild card because they have the new DC. Like, what for a player that's kind of this hybrid safety linebacker, can blitz, can make plays in coverage, but maybe he isn't great at any of them, which I think has been the Isaiah Simmons experience. It's like he can do all this stuff, but does he do any of it well? But can Shane Bowen find a place for a guy who's a former top 10 pick, I believe, out of Clemson? So obviously a special athlete. For Philly, Nakobe Dean has always been like a huge question mark, because I feel like people are waiting for it's his knees, right? His knees to blow up.
He's got a shoulder now, I think. He's basically got a lot going on.
Yeah, I think he's been an injury risk since he was drafted. Otherwise, if you drafted on the talent alone, a lot of people would have had him as a first rounder. Yeah. And he was not. And then Dallas linebacker is I don't know. Eric Kendricks was with Mike Zimmer forever in Minnesota, so they've got the familiarity piece. But how good still are they?
Yeah, I think Eric Kendricks is still a good football player, but again, is on the downside of his career. And I think when you look at, I think Philly, everyone kind of looks at the names, Nakobe Dean, Devin White. And like I said, I think Devin White's a little overrated. I don't think he's a bad football player. I think he's a little overrated. And I think that's why people look at that linebacker group and say, oh, they're maybe one of the better groups in the division. I'm not of that mindset, really, because I think this, and we'll see, obviously with Fangio there, maybe he elevates, maybe he's a better football player, maybe they coach it differently, whatever that looks like. But I don't know. I think I'd probably lean ever so slightly to Dallas in this case. And it's really just kind of like what you prefer, and I think you could argue that the upside of Devin White is exciting, especially in a new environment. If Nakobe Dean's healthy, obviously he's like one of the smarter football players on that roster. So like all those things are really good. But, he hasn't done it. He's been banged up. Nakobe Dean has. And Devin White has been inconsistent, especially last year was very inconsistent. So I would just say, like, kind of depends on what you're preferring. I think you get more consistent with Kendricks. Clark, I'm not super familiar with, but was good in the role he was in last year with Dallas. And I think I would just probably bet on the floor there a little bit, you know what I'm saying, as opposed to the ceiling that you get with Philly. But again, the depth at linebacker for Philly is a little bit gnarly. And I really like Maurice Lufau for Dallas. So I just would probably lean to Dallas. I think they've just got the floor's a little bit higher. The ceiling might not be as high, but I'm going to bet on floor. Kendricks is a guy who's done it. Clark was very, very solid last year. And I think Maurice Lufau has enough athletic ability and length to be something special potentially. So I'd say they're 3 for me.
Yeah, it's also interesting, these positions wind up merging as well, the hybrid stuff. Like if we were to add in Defoe or Jeremy Chin or some of these other hybrid safety linebackers to the discussion, same thing in Dallas, how does that change the conversation? And then, they don't operate independently either. I think that is the one area where if I was going to make an argument for Philly, I think the job of being a linebacker in Philly is probably easier because you have Jalen Carter and those guys in front of you. And, especially as run defenders, you're just a cleaner. Like if I'm Devin White and I get to play behind Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, I'm like sick. I'm going to have 180 tackles. If you're playing behind the interior in Dallas, you're probably going to wind up with a guard on you with a little bit more frequency. So I think that's like again, we're trying to do it as independently, like who are the players that we're talking about, not how are they going to play within or too much reliant upon the structure and scheme around them. But that is just something that I think when it comes to the actual football in the fall, that is worth pointing out.
Yeah. No, and again, one of the reasons you're so confident and to this point in, Bobby Wagner and Luvu is that they're in a defense that I think is going to maximize what they do, and again, like there's a little bit of a question mark with some of those other groups. And again, I mentioned how excited I am about Bobby Okereke and McFadden, up in New York. Because I think that schematically it fits kind of what they do well, having watched Shane Bowen's defense last year in Tennessee. But again, like Devin White, he was in the Todd Bowles defense in Tampa Bay. They're blitzing him all the time. He's not going to do that with the same level of frequency in Philly. Dallas, I think both those guys are smart guys. And it just watching their usage pattern last year, I think it lends itself to what Zimmer wants to be or what he wanted to be previously. And again, this defense might look completely different. Who knows? But I think that's, again, just to kind of point that out, like schematically, we're assuming certain things, but we don't know until we see him actually play games, especially with the linebacker position. It's so challenging. And DBs, which we'll talk about in a minute. So,
in fact, we'll talk about them right now.